Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for your lunch hour as we look at this topic of social media's role in personal finance. As Brad mentioned, definitely send questions along the way. I love for this to be a little more interactive versus just waiting to the end. If you have something, I've got it up on my screen. I'll be watching it and answer the questions as they come up. So let's jump in into the presentation. So what did we do? We went out to the market and did a quantitative survey among adults 18 to 57-year-olds in the US to understand their use of social media when it comes to financial topics or not. So we had people both who did and did not use social media for financial topics. 315 to be specific that did, and 435 who didn't. So we're going to make those distinctions as we go through. They did all use social media for something, whether it be to, learn how to cook something or whatever, stay in touch with friends. Everybody who participated did have to use social media in some way, shape, or form. As you can see, our sample was split out by generation. We had 750 respondents in total, 250 per generation. And there are, as you might expect, many differences among the generations when we look at Gen Z, Millennial, and Gen X. And the research was fielded just a couple of months ago, back in February and March, which at this point seems like a long time ago. So let's jump right in. I don't think it's a secret that consumers, especially the younger ones, are using social media for everything. But just think back to the last time, last night actually, I was using social media to figure out how to clean off broccoli rabe. So it's definitely something that everybody is using, and it's not surprising that the use of social media for financial topics is also quite prevalent. But there are many nuances. So let's take a closer look. So we asked folks, are you using social media for financial topics? And you can see here that social media is for over 4 in 10 folks are using social media to learn about financial topics, whether that be getting advice or how to save, how to budget, what investments, etc. It is a channel through which they are paying attention, just along with friends and family, parents, etc. You can see that it's the top 4 are internet searches, just going out and Googling like we all do, social media, friends, and then parents and family that we typically see. And I've seen the same sort of statistics consistently in other research we've done. So my question was, who are these people? Who are the people who are using social media to learn about financial topics? And some of these may not be surprising to you. For example, they tend to be the younger generation. So the Gen Z and the millennials are much more likely to be using social media for financial topics than the Gen Xers, my generation. Then there's also some behavioral things that we notice. People who feel knowledgeable about finance already are much more likely to be using social media for financial topics. People who are interested, right? They're interested in the topic and they're paying a little closer attention. So that's also not surprising that they'd be using social media for financial topics. They might find it engaging and fun. And those people who are more likely to take on above average risk are also those who are more likely to be using social media for financial topics. Another interesting finding we found with those who do use social media is that they're using, on average, many more resources to stay on top of financial topics. On average, they're using 5.3 resources, meaning they're maybe using social media and web, and they're talking to their parents, their family, maybe their employer, etc. But they're using more resources to stay on top of these topics, these financial topics, versus those who are not using social media. So that, to me, tells me that, hey, these people are just curious. They're going out to many different resources. And one of those happens to be social media as well. So there's usage, and then there's trust. And trust is going to be a big theme that you're gonna hear about today. So let's take a look at the next slide here, and we get into the question of trust. We ask, do you use it? Yes or no? What resources that you use do you trust the most? And again, I wasn't surprised to see these three resources to bubble to the top. If you're using a financial advisor, clearly that is going to be as could be expected, a very trusted resource. Other financial professionals, financial companies are also, they've built a relationship. They are credible. They are trusted. So those are the 3 at the top. What is interesting, though, if you haven't noticed it already, social media is down here at the bottom, with only 32% of the respondents saying, yeah, I use it and I trust it. And what I found interesting is that the level of trust is relatively consistent and relatively low compared to other resources across generations, right? So they use it, but there is a healthy dose of skepticism in terms of what they're reading, right? So why, the social media, we're going to understand why it feels like the Wild West, or why not trust it. But let's first look at, among those who do trust it, why do they trust it, right? So, those are the ones that said, hey, I like the volume of information. I like to be able to figure out what I want to follow or not follow. Give me the information and I'll decide whether or not I want to follow these resources, or I might have an expert that I'm following online. We'll talk about experts and people who are being followed in a bit. So they are confident in their ability to be able to sort of decipher between what's trustworthy and not trustworthy. And that's actually what we asked as well. We found that those people who use social media for financial topics in general are much more confident in their ability to decipher what's trustworthy, what's real, and maybe what shouldn't be followed or what should not be listened to. So I'll send, actually, a colleague of mine forwarded this interesting quiz to me, and I'll share it with you all. I just put it into the chat. It was a quiz from the Washington Post, or maybe it was Bankrate through the Washington Post. But anyway, it was a quiz to see how well you can figure out if something is accurate or not, just to test your own knowledge. So those are the people who trust content on social media. What about those who use social media for financial topics but don't trust it? A much larger cohort. 68% of those said that I use it, but I don't trust it. And here's why. A quarter of them said, hey, there's misinformation out there. I don't know what's right and what's wrong. Maybe they can't decipher. There's little regulation. It's hard to figure out if it's credible or not. If it's just some Joe talking about something, how do I know that he or she knows what they're talking about? And then people are trying to scam me. There's this inherent concern about being scammed, and that's legitimate. We asked them how many of all of them had been scammed online, and almost half had been contacted in the past year by somebody who was offering something that was potentially fraudulent, right? So I think this concern of, I might be scammed is a very legitimate one, and one that many have experienced. So those are the reasons why people tend to trust, and more importantly, the things that are diminishing trust when it comes to content on social media. So, and then we also, just to not forget about those people who don't use social media for financial topics at all. They might use it for personal reasons, but not for financial topics. They sort of have the same concern. It comes back to trustworthy, and is it trustworthy and is it credible? Roughly half of them said, hey, the reason I don't use social media for financial topics is because I don't trust it. It's not credible. This second row here shows me that, hey, they're also going somewhere else, places that they prefer to go. And that included web searches, family and friends, and financial services company. So the family and friends and financial services company made a lot of sense to me, but web searches, I feel, have a similar sort of potential for credibility, depending on, I guess, the source. And here you can see some other reasons they don't go on. Social media is for fun stuff, not serious stuff like financial services. It feels very unregulated. Again, echoing some of those reasons that even our users are saying when it comes to why they don't trust social media. So they're using social media to learn about financial topics. But they're skeptical, right? So I'm asking myself, well, if you're so skeptical, why bother using it in the first place? So let's take a look at why, even though they're maybe not trusting what they're reading, or they're skeptical about what they're reading, why are they going there? And the reasons, I don't think, will be a surprise to any of you. And I looked at this by generation, right? Just because I was expecting to see more generational differences. What's interesting is that it was actually pretty consistent. So let's take a look. Gen Z, the top reason for them, it's simple and it's easy. It's bite size. I can go in quick. It's in my stream. Just imagine when you see that pop up. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, my running partner, and I asked her about her use of financial topics in social media. She says, yeah, I see something and it's a quick bit on how to make a budget or something. That's really easy. It's there. It's easy to understand, and I'll share it with whoever, right? So it's quick and it's simple. It's engaging and it's fun is important to the Gen Zs. It's where I spend all my time. for half of them, right? Makes sense. It's relatable. I relate to the person who's providing this information. So my hypothesis going in was that these numbers are going to look different for different generations. But as you may have guessed, based on how I'm framing this, they're really similar across the different generations. So when we look at millennials, their top reason is I'm already on social media. It's meeting me where I am, right? So I'm on social media. And then if I happen to see something that's related to a financial topic, great, it's right there. I don't have to go somewhere else to find it. So that was their top reason. For them, the other topics are similar. Simplicity, it's relatable, it's engaging, right? And Gen X has the same. So there too, it's simple was their top one. And then the other ones you can see, they're all consistent reasons for engaging with social media to learn about financial topics. Those are the top reasons across the generations, but I wanted to dig a little deeper to see if are there nuances, are there certain things that are going on? And there were some really interesting ones that I think are interesting and relevant, especially to financial services companies. Those with a financial advisor are much more likely than those without to actually be following a specific influencer or expert. Maybe it's their own financial advisor who has something on LinkedIn or wherever they can post that they're following, right? So they were much more likely than those without a financial advisor to be following an influencer. But Gen X was much more likely to be motivated to use social media because of a fear of missing out than other generations. So it's that fear of like, am I missing out on an investment opportunity? Actually, I was just talking to somebody about GameStop that appears to have reared its head again recently. So Gen X is much more likely to be worried about missing out on something and therefore use social media versus the Gen Zers and the millennials who are much less likely to be doing that. And then the last thing that was interesting in terms of why use social media is that those who are less knowledgeable about financial topics, they were more likely to go to social media because they found it intimidating to go to a financial advisor, right? It's 31% versus 9%. So that's quite a big delta. And that's interesting because social media does make it, we talked about relatability, accessibility. There are some, and I'll talk about this in a bit, but there is some research about the taboo of talking about financial topics, or maybe not feeling confident, like in this case, not feeling like they can talk to a financial advisor because it's intimidating. It makes it more accessible to a larger population. And that's what social media does in general, any topic. So is social media the future of financial education is the question. And it seems that younger generations think so, right? When we ask that question, is it the future of social media? Roughly 4 in 10, both Gen Zs and millennials, for all users. So this is the whole 750 respondents said that is potentially the future of financial education. The Gen Xers were a little more skeptical, or a little less convinced that it's the future. And then when we looked at these numbers based on those people who are already using social media for financial topics, the younger generations, again, were even more likely to say, absolutely. Over half of them said, yes, it is the future of financial education. It is a channel through which I can now learn. And I want to highlight a recent Forbes study that I found that said that I think it was got it here. 76% of millennials and Gen Zs think financial content on social media has made it less taboo to talk about money, and 62% feel empowered by the access to such information on social media platforms. So again, that reinforces that social media, to be trusted or not, it's another question, but it's providing information that empowers folks to be able to potentially make decisions, empowers them to maybe talk about money, talk about finances, which maybe wasn't in prior generations the case. So let's talk about what are they using social media for? Like why? So we've talked about that they use it. Yes, trust it, maybe not so much. Why use it? It's it's easy, it's relatable. And then what are they actually doing on social media? So here we gave them a list of things they could be doing. And what bubbles to the top is general savings, investment recommendations, followed by budgeting. And I would have guessed general savings, absolutely. being one of those things that's easily digestible in a social media platform, and a topic that's relevant to a large swath of the population. You can see some others that bubble to the top: credit card recommendations, banking, and then you can see that as we go down the line that the relevancy of some of these topics are less relevant, but I think it also reflects topics that depend on life stage. So when we look at this by life stage or generation, we see that there's some things you'd expect, like Gen Z, for example. Their top reason or top thing they do on social media for financial topics is general savings. For millennials, they were interesting in that if you look down this millennial column, pardon me, you'll see that the millennials are actually using social media to learn about a broad range of topics, whether it be savings or budgeting. They're more likely than some other generations to be talking about managing credit card debt or buying a property, retirement topics. So they're using it for a large range of topics. Again, they're also the population that said, I'm using social media because that's where I'm spending my time. And I read some stats that millennials actually spend the most time of all the generations on social media. When we look at Gen X, why are they going to social media for financial topics? Their number one is the investments and investment recommendations. That might tie back to their fear of missing out on investment recommendations. They're also significantly more likely to be talking about retirement topics. Again, when you look at their life stage, it's not surprising that that's the topic that's more relevant to them. So again, content is relevant to life stage. If you're 20 something, you're maybe less interested in certain topics than somebody who's maybe in their 40s or 50s or 60s. So this is also not surprising, since savings is the key reason, or budgeting is the top three for why they're going to social media, for what topics. When we looked at what financial advice have they taken from social media, it's not surprising that a savings strategy is the number one by far. Over half of the folks had gone online and found a savings strategy. And if you do a quick look on some of the platforms, Instagram, TikTok, etc., and you do like a savings challenge, there are many different savings challenges out there that people have posted. So again, this is something that is potentially easier to, savings in general is potentially a topic that's easier to talk about. It's relevant to a large part of the population, and something that people can gravitate toward. Actually, this running partner I was talking about, she was talking about having found something on savings that she shared with her daughter, who is a Gen Zer. Again, it's easy. It's easy to understand. Maybe it's something that you can put into use right away. So these are the topics, again, that folks are specifically taking advice on online. Let's take a look at the question of investing. Social media has also motivated almost half of our respondents who use social media for financial topics to start investing. The fire truck is going by. So again, it plays a role, and folks are using it for many different purposes. Let's take a bit of time just to talk about the platforms, because I'm sure some of you are saying, well, there's a difference between different platforms. And we did ask that question. What are you using? Because they all had to use social media. And then what are you using for financial topics, for those who do use it for financial topics? And so just to level set, YouTube was the most commonly social media site across all generations. So 80% plus across generations using YouTube as a social media site that they visit, right? And the remaining sort of played out very much similar to this. And what you're looking at here is the social media site usage to learn about financial topics, right? So their usage and where they go to learn about financial topics, not surprisingly, mirrored themselves, pardon me. So you can see here, there are some generational differences that you would expect. So YouTube across generations, again, for those who use social media for financial topics, use YouTube, right? And then you see things like the Gen Zs, their second highest is TikTok. Again, I don't think it's surprising to folks. That's a more common platform than, let's say, Facebook, which is more common among my generation, the Gen X folks. So you can see here that there are some generational differences that one would expect to see when it comes to where they're going to learn about financial topics. But when it comes to what they trust, again, it's that question of what they use and what they trust. And it's fascinating to me that there is a difference. So again, YouTube bubbles to the top. YouTube is used the most and it is trusted the most, right? So across generations, somewhat higher for those who are younger, but that's also reflective of those who are more likely to trust and use social media for financial topics, period. So that's expected. But then what I found interesting, and maybe not too surprising, is that on the prior slide, you may have noticed that LinkedIn and Reddit were farther down, right? When it comes to trust, they come into position second and third position with above a third, almost a half of the younger generations trusting those platforms as a resource. And when you think about what LinkedIn is, for example, LinkedIn, who's posting, their credentials, you can look them up, you can figure out who they are, you can decide for yourself a little more easily than you can on, let's say, TikTok, if somebody is to be trusted. Reddit, a little less to the lesser extent, but there too, it's people providing relevant information, sharing their experiences, providing what they know in detail and more of a researchy kind of way versus, again, a Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, right? So I think that really struck me as those two moving up, and guess you probably guessed it already, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, when it comes to trust, are a little less trusted, right? And that isn't too surprising. We actually asked that question for some of these platforms. Unfortunately, not for LinkedIn nor Reddit, but we did ask for some of the other more popular ones: YouTube, Instagram, etc., TikTok, Facebook, and Reddit, pardon me, and X/Twitter. What are your perceptions of these different sites, right? And there's definitely a difference in terms of perceptions. And YouTube, not surprisingly, leads other sites when it comes to these things. It has relevant content. It has a lot of content. It has content in a format that I like. I can watch a quick video. It educates me. It is information I can trust. It's consistent. It has a good reputation. It has influencers and groups that I follow. So there are many reasons why YouTube is considered a top social media site. When you sort of think about that in the context of financial topics, again, these are factors that build a level of trust. Then if you look at sort of the flip-flop of that, you'll notice that I've highlighted that these numbers when it comes to Facebook, for example, which tended to seem too commercial. It's cluttered with useless information that might distract from me being able to learn about a financial topic. It's not for serious topics, or it's not for my demographic. I'm assuming that was a lot of the younger folks who don't see Facebook as something that they use much. But you can see that not all social media sites are created equal, and that is a consideration for a financial services company or for whoever when posting content, where to post and what the potential audience is and what their perceptions of that site are, and that perception of the site colors the perception of the content they're going to find. And I don't see any questions. Unless I've missed them, Brad. I don't know if anything's come through that I've missed that I can't see it for some reason.
No, I don't think any new questions so far.
All right, we'll keep plowing ahead then. So we've talked a lot about trust, right? When it comes to learning about financial topics on social media. So we wanted to understand, well, how do they figure out who to trust, right? What builds that level of credibility? And how do they determine who to trust on social media, individuals and such? And how do they determine who they're going to follow? So let's take a look at those. Oops. So here's a look at what factors drive, trust. What makes something more trustworthy on social media. So not surprisingly, credentials comes up to the top. Does the person who's posting something have credentials? Are things being explained clearly? Can I quickly and easily, remember that's one of the reasons they use social media, can I quickly and easily understand what I'm looking at? Is it transparent? Are they being transparent about their own experiences? We've heard that in other research too, where if somebody's talking about their own experience, maybe they're sharing their own budget to make me understand their experience. That builds my level of trust in what they're saying. And I think that's where Reddit does a lot of sort of sharing in the community, and builds trust in terms of what to believe and not to believe. And it's not trying to sell me something. I don't want you on YouTube trying to sell me something. I want to learn something. I want to understand something, but I don't necessarily want to be sold to. So those are the top 4 reasons for finding something trustworthy, somebody trustworthy on social media. Less important are things like having a number of followers, or it's similar experiences to mine, is less about trust and more about I'll follow them, and we'll see that in a second, and then comes up first on the page in searches. But I want to go back to these top 4, and especially credentials, because there were interesting generational and gender differences when it came to the importance of credentials. So we found that Gen X is much more likely to indicate that credentials is something that they use to determine whether or not something's trustworthy, much more so than the younger generation. So 41% versus 34% for millennials and 31% for Gen Z. And so that is interesting, which made me wonder, well, do younger generations understand what credentials might mean? What those credentials are? I think that could be relevant, but if they don't understand what a credential, what value it holds, then it's not going to be as important than it is for somebody who's maybe older and maybe more familiar with credentials and the role that credentials can play. Women also, across generations, interestingly, were directionally more likely to leverage credentials to determine if something is trustworthy or not. So the numbers that you see here on the left, those are all for people who actually today use social media for financial topics. I was curious though, for those who don't, what does this look like? What would make it more trustworthy for them? Because remember, they're not on social media, the main reason being that they don't trust or they don't find that the content is credible. So these are the numbers for people who do not use social media currently for financial topics. And the numbers sort of bear out very similarly. Number 1 for them is credentials as well, right? So understanding who is the person that's providing this. Are they a CFP? Do they have some sort of licensing or background or experience that's relevant, that gives them the credibility to talk about this? And then the second most important thing, again, is that clarity. It's that being able to quickly explain things clearly in bite-sized information so that I can learn something as I read through my social feed. And then the others all fall much farther down, even the ones that are important for the users of social media, like the transparency and not trying to sell me, that something is still important, but less so than those top 2 for those people who don't. So there's trustworthy, and then there's following. And the reasons to follow somewhat mirror those who build trustworthy, but there's an interesting one when we look at credentials here. But credentials actually is less of a reason to follow somebody on social media, which I thought was really interesting. So what are the top factors that motivate somebody to follow somebody or follow a website, or follow content on social media? Again, you'll see some of the key themes. They explain things clearly. The information is relevant to me. It's relevant. I'm looking to buy a house, or I have credit card debt, or I want to learn how to budget better. Like, these are things I'm looking for content that's relevant to me, not for things, that might not be relevant to my situation. So relevancy is critical. They're not trying to sell me something. And then the other one is the transparency about their own experiences as an individual, right? Which I thought was very interesting. But now the thing that I mentioned earlier, credentials are much less likely to be a reason to follow somebody. So yes, it builds trustworthiness, but it's not necessarily a reason that I'm going to follow somebody, which I thought was really fascinating. And I found some research, again, I think it was from Forbes, and they said that roughly a third of millennials and Gen Zs are familiar with what it actually means. So their lack of familiarity with credentials and checking credentials and doing that is less so than older generations. So again, maybe why credentials is less of a reason to follow somebody. It's more like, is their information clear? And can I, is it relevant to me and my situation? Again, these numbers are looking at those people who use social media for financial topics. And I was curious, well, what those people who don't use social media for financial topics, what are they saying? And what they're saying is it mirrors it relatively similarly, but there's a difference here. So top reasons for them to maybe follow somebody, if they were to follow somebody, is again, explains things clearly and information relevant to me are the top two. But then you'll notice that for this group, that credentials are more important and significantly more important than it is for the population that's already following somebody on social media or has social media for financial topics. So credentials build that level of credibility that this group is looking for, right? And this group, again, remember, are less confident in their ability to figure out if something should be trusted or not online. So credentials is a way for them to be able to do that. All right, so what does this all mean for financial services companies, like from a following perspective? So we about 1/3 of the consumers that we interviewed who currently use social media for financial topics currently follow a financial services company. And we asked which ones, and it was a long list, but a lot of the ones at the top were their banks. It was listing actual bank names. And then you'll see that 26%, an additional 26% are likely to start following a financial services company. So that signaled to me that there is an appetite to do so. But what are the reasons? What would motivate them to do so? And if I could have an open mic, I'm sure you could probably guess some of the reasons why they would be motivated to follow a financial services company. Let me show you what they said. As you may have guessed, relevancy is the top reason. Like, are they sharing something that's relevant to me? Is it focused on education? Yes, I might do, a bank might be selling a certain product or a certain credit card or a certain, product or service, but are they educating me on a financial concept, on why I should do A versus B? So it's again about education. I do business with them already. My bank is Bank A, and therefore I'm going to follow Bank A on social media. And then they offer promotions, incentives, and offers. That's a financial incentive to follow somebody on social media, not to be ignored. But those are the top 4 reasons why folks are motivated to follow a financial institution, financial services company on social media. Again, this is for the people who currently already do engage in, with financial topics and social media. Let's take a look at those who don't. And it very much mirrors the same thing. Again, relevancy being the most important thing when it comes to deciding whether or not to follow a financial services company on social media, followed by education. So that is a learning that there's an appetite to learn, an appetite for it to be relevant. You remember, short and quick, so I can quickly adapt or build something into my life. And then finally, when it comes to what's the most valuable type of post that they could see from a financial services company. And here again, I wanted to look at both those who currently do use social media to see if they're different from those who currently do not use social media for financial topics. And there were some nuances. So the ones on the left here are those who currently use social media for financial topics. Their most valuable type of post from a financial institution is, targeted advice. Again, relevant advice is how you can look at that. So, buying a house, paying off debt, etc. Second was explanations of financial products and concepts. And that was fairly broad. So it could be, understanding how a credit card works, understanding, when should I use, this approach versus that approach? What kind of life insurance makes sense? And when do what makes sense where? Not like, here's our product and please buy this, but it's more about understanding and developing an understanding of the content. So the top 2 are the same for those who are currently not using social media, but it was flip-flopped. Those who are not using social media now want more education, explanations of products and concepts, followed by advice that's targeted and relevant to what they're trying to accomplish today. So in closing, I would like you all to leave this webinar with sort of three main findings, or three main things that will hopefully stick with you. The first is that social media, it's a growing aspect of financial education. It is an important channel through which people are engaging with financial topics, are learning about financial topics, especially if they maybe don't feel comfortable through other channels. So I think it's prevalent today, and as the younger generations get older and new generations come in, I think it's just going to grow in terms of its role in financial education as a whole. And social media content, financial content, social media, why is it so relevant, or why is it used so broadly, even if it's not trusted so much? It's because it's easy. It meets them where they're at. It meets them where they are currently. So they're on their phones, they're on their social media. It's where they're spending their time, and it's making it more accessible. And then it's also relatable. So that is critical. But there is a question of trust that I think any financial content that's online has to sort of find a balance with. So it's being used, but there's a trust issue. That lack of trust is due to, as we saw earlier, potential misinformation, limited regulation, a limited ability to figure out if something is credible or not, especially for those who are maybe not as financially savvy or comfortable with their financial knowledge. So I think credentials, especially for certain populations, and then building the awareness of what credentials are and mean, could be a way of building trust of social, let's just say, media resources. And then it's also the question of clarity, transparency of information, and also extremely important is education versus selling me something. Like, teach me something, however quick the bite is. Teach me something that I can trust and learn and apply to my life. So social media, I think it does represent an opportunity for financial services companies in the long run. You already have that level of trust. Like if somebody is a client of a financial services company, you have built-in trust. So you have a head start, ahead of some other folks who might be posting about financial topics on social media. So it's critical that you leverage that level of trust that you already have, but it's also critical that financial services companies come to it for the lens of education and relatable content, because that is what's going to resonate with consumers versus even if there's an inkling of sales. I think that breaks down that level of trust or makes it less of a likely channel through which they're going to want to learn about financial topics. This is a presentation that will be available online. I think it gets sent out to all the participants. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues or other folks you might feel would be interested in this topic and learning about this topic. I've also placed mine and my colleague Amy's email address here on this page. Do not hesitate to reach out with any sort of follow-ups if you want to know more about what we did or what we do as a company. I would love to hear from you. And that's it.